Hi there, this is Lorna, and this is
Marianne.
um, welcome to Isn't She Amazing? We always look at all the different reasons that women do just such wonderful things that are, but they're also very different. So today we want to talk about what's our topic today, Marianne? What are you thinking that we should?
Well, Lorna, I was thinking because you have an interesting story as a Latina woman, and we were talking about just diversity the other day, and I want to know
Yeah.
more about your culture, your journey as a minority, and how it has affected you.
Well, it's really interesting because up until recently, I knew I was different, but I never really thought of myself as, and I didn't really think that people saw me as different until there was the whole DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion movement that seemed to be going. And I would pause and think, well, do people really see me different? And I had a couple of experiences. I went to this big conference and it was all women, and they divided the women between women of color and white women. And I was like, but when they had a panel and when they were discussing it, I identified more with the white women, but I was a woman of color technically. And so I stayed in that room with the women of color, but even in that room, I didn't feel like that was where I belonged. So it's really been just interesting and kind of like makes me think about really all the differences that we all have. Like if you're a Caucasian white woman, you still have diversity. You still have diversity of experiences. You still have diversity of thought. Like that's really what the diversity is, not so much the color. Just in my view, being a Latina, it's like it's not. That's not really. I'm not is who I am because my culture is different growing up than it is here on the East Coast, but that's a part of me, but that's doesn't isn't everything that identifies me.
But then you also have, as a Latina woman, you told me I think your mom's from Spain, your dad was from Mexico, two totally different kinds of Hispanic. Plus, I think he was half American Indian too, right?
He's part American Indian, yeah.
And so there's a whole blend of richness and and culture diversity within you, not to mention your thought diversity.
Right. Because that's a whole other
Oh, well, that's
diversity.
another discussion. but
That's a discussion for another
but
time.
well, what you said was so true, is because everybody has expectations about what diversity means or what a person of color is, and where they belong. I mean, even with you at that conference, it was like, okay, so you belong in this room. No, not really, because this room didn't really recognize you as much as your other friends, your white friends, I think you said, were saying, Lorna, where did you go? Because you're just their friend. Why would you leave us and go to another room?
Right, because I'm one of them.
Right. So in many
Well, I was
ways,
also in a room once when all this. Go ahead.
no, I'm done.
I was going to say I've been in a room also where they've said, like, look in this room, there's zero diversity, and I'm thinking, but there is. I'm like, I'm diversity. But and so that was it. That's like, I don't know how other women feel about it, but that's just an interesting place because you think, well, it's good because they see me as one of them, or I'm part of the group and the team. But then on the flip side, they don't really see me for who I am. So like because I do have different culture and I have different experiences that add a different viewpoint. And when it's framed that way, and not just me, but just people in general, if you're in a room and it's framed that way and you do have something different to add, it's hard to be brave and to like stand out, because you're like, my viewpoint is so different because of my experience, but I'm not sure that if this is the forum to bring this up, because you can't just like blurt it out, like because you've got to have some context, and is that the place, and if that's not the place, then when is the right time? I feel like there's just a lot of that struggle that you have, and I'm not sure, I mean, do other women, I mean, women in our audience or feel that way, or just women in general? It's not, I mean, many times that you're in a room that's more male dominated, and so women tend to look at things from a different lens, and if you're with a group of, you know, primarily male, how hard is it to stand up even then, because your viewpoint is different, and you're going to have, you know, it's going to be, difficult's not the word, but it's going to be challenging sometimes to get them to see your view.
That's so important. And I really would love to see what our viewers think in the comments below, because, you know, it's kind of brave to come forth and say, okay, I'm a minority. I want to be acknowledged for who I am and what I am, but I also want to be heard for what I think. And it might not be the same as what every other Hispanic or Latino woman, whether she's from Spain or whether she's from Mexico or whether she's from Honduras or Guatemala or whatever. It's, you know, because it's, people just need to be heard. Yes, you need to be recognized for a certain group you're in and stuff like this, but also, and I think also as important is who you are as an individual and what you think, and you don't have to go with the group think by agreeing with, well, every Hispanic woman or every Latina woman or every Black woman or every African American woman or every Asian woman, because Japanese, Chinese, Taiwanese, Korean, I mean, they're all so incredibly different in their culture, but because they have similarities in the way they look, people clump them all together. And
I think even like the richness of when you surround yourself with people from like different cultures. I have friends that are from, I have an American Indian friend, I have a Chinese friend, I have African American friend. I mean, and we're all the same, but we do have different culture. Our culture is different, and it's just so enriching when you learn about other people's culture, just the food or their customs. It's just so interesting. I remember when I moved here, I had not really been around the Jewish faith, and I was working for an accounting firm, and most of my friends that I met were Jewish, and it was just so interesting to learn what they practiced, and it was really enriching.
And even that, there's different kinds of Judaism, and you know, so it's we can't just look at a group of people and say, oh, I get them, I understand them, but it's each person in the group was raised in a different family, has different experiences. I mean, if you have a whole row of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant families, they still have different cultures. They, you know, you get different ways you're raised, different beliefs, different religions, different all kinds of things. And I think one of the things,
and it's even, well, I was gonna say, it's even like where you grow up, like in the United States, the Midwest is very different from the East Coast. The East Coast is very different from the West Coast. So even like that culture of the region that you grew up in, not even mention like around the world, but just in the United States, it's very different. There's so many differences. And so that's part of who you are also. That diversity is also like where you were raised.
Well, you were raised in New Mexico, and I was raised in
Yeah.
Pennsylvania, and that's kind of like my area where I was raised was more German based, and so forth, and more Amish Mennonite kind of background. I'm not Amish or Mennonite, but a lot of that culture was blended with my
Was there.
grandparents, and so forth. And you were in New Mexico, and you were born in New Mexico. Your mom, I think you said, was also born in New Mexico, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so you're created a culture that's from Spain, maybe, but born in the United States, in the Southwest.
Well, and it was interesting doing some research of that area where they grew up. I mean, it was the Spaniards, the American Indians. There was a big Jewish contingent. I mean, I had no idea. And so then you even merge all of those cultures. And so it's like a subculture of all of those different cultures because you've integrated so much of it.
So may I ask you a
But
question?
I mean, I think that's what the most, yep.
I what would you specifically like me to know, or our audience in general, some things that you think are different about the way, well, there's a lot different about the way you think, but that's a different day, right? But
That's,
but
that's for another
like
day.
2 or 3 things about you that you wish people knew that they don't just by looking at you.
Well, oh, that's a great question. I think like for me, like I had to work really hard. Seem to be successful and um but it was a lot of work to get to this point. I think when you have a culture where I had, my dad had an 8th grade education, my mom had a high school education, and I really had to work really hard to get to this point. I think sometimes people see and they're like, oh, it's like, I hear lots of times you're so lucky because you have this or you've accomplished this. And it's not really been luck. It's been
Not
a lot
luck.
of work. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's not, and I think that's really like, even that's like the one thing that I would really like to convey to people is things aren't always easy. And I think even based on your culture, um, you know, it just, yeah, I think like, what about me? I mean, that's a hard question. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's like, I'm not, I'm like, I'm me. Like, so what is that? I really, the biggest thing is I feel that we should all pause and give people their voice. Like if there is a different perspective, I think it's when you're in a situation and you think, I can see this, I'm seeing this from a different lens, or I have something else to contribute, but it's so different based on, I grew up, I didn't have a lot growing up. So when I look and I say now, I do a lot of work with underserved and trying to help, people, like give them a step up. But I'm like, I'm at a different place than I was 30 years ago. So when I was that young girl trying to make her way, but you still remember, I think it's just remembering that, so many times if you are, from like an underserved group, you feel like you're invisible. And, and, that goes a diversity perspective, but it's also from a women's perspective. I think so many times we feel invisible, like I have something to contribute. And when you're older, that's even more so because so
Yes.
many people think that we've done what we're going to do and now we're kind of this invisible group. So even like older women as a part of diversity, it's just like a really complicated topic, I
Yeah.
think. But I think when you really look, like, what do we try? See people for who they are and give people the opportunity to voice what the differences are, because so many times that makes for a better solution
Yeah. Yeah.
because you have a different perspective and you're not just solving for one problem in a very tunnel vision type of way, because we have all of this and people are free. I mean, you don't want it to be like this free for all, but you know, got to contain, like, what are you trying to accomplish? But just give people a voice.
Yeah, because obviously you didn't, to get to be such an incredible CFO of a large nonprofit as you were, and you weren't a normal, well, you're not a normal anything. So how's that? But you weren't even a normal CFO. I mean, you weren't just left brain CPA. I mean, you have all this creativity
Right.
that you had to take all kinds of, I think you wore, if you had to identify, you wore what, like 5 or 7 hats as a CFO. As it was
Right.
such a big organization that there were so many things that just came up that needed creativity to solve, and you helped them do that. And that, you know, that's something that's you know, from deep inside. Yes,
Right.
you had a good education to get to be successful, but you also had to have developed this huge problem solving creativity piece of you that
Right.
that helps you as a consultant in an enormous amount of ways. I mean, it's not just financial, but it's practical and it's creative, and and I really admire that. I mean, everybody does locally around where we have met and so forth. And
Oh, that's very kind. But
and
you know, it is, I think I've been very fortunate. Like I always say, I was like my biggest, most important job was being a mom. And I've kind of acquired all these other skills by taking it. It is, and it goes back to like just taking that chance.
yeah,
I didn't know how to do a lot of things that I've done in my career, but I've taken the chance and I've learned. And that is always like, if we can encourage all these amazing women out there that are listening to us to just take that leap, just try it. And
absolutely.
sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but it is all about, you know, we keep talking about that course correcting and those steps. Take a step and learn. Just learn
And share
and learn
and
about other
share
people and share.
because the
And so
more
that's
conversation
this
we can get
community that, no, let's say just this community that we want to create. That's what we want. We want a forum where women can share their voice, can come up with bigger dreams, recognize what they're capable of accomplishing, and have their village. You just want to, you know, have the village that we can do such amazing things individually, but collectively.
and be loved and accepted for who they are.
Exactly, exactly.
That's a perfect way for us to wrap this up, I think. And it's just we love to
Yeah.
hear what our audience has to say. So go ahead and put stuff in the chat. Don't worry about, you know, we're going to ask people always to be kind, but allow people to have their voice, because you are loved and you are safe here. And we want to create an environment for that to be like that.
Absolutely. Is there anything we want to give them another step or something to do?
I think the action step is for somebody to make a comment in the comments below about something you have thought about diversity, equity, and inclusion, something like that, where you either changed your mind or you think differently than a particular group.
The group.
And maybe you felt like Lorna has felt, yes, I belong to a minority, but I'm also, I kind of feel like I belong to a couple minorities, but I really want to be just recognized as me. And we want to
Right.
recognize.
And I think that some of that, like I said, like, I'll just end real quick, is like, for me, that whole diversity, like I said, I didn't see myself as different. So has that in some ways divided also,
Divide
because
and
when
dark.
you're saying we want to recognize, all of us have diversity, whether, it's not just color. It
Mhm.
is. But we're all people.
Yeah, yeah. Very important, both things, individuality and belonging. And we want to create that here.
Yeah,
So thanks for sharing that,
absolutely.
Lorna. That was a good conversation. I really appreciate your being vulnerable like that. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank our audience for joining us. And isn't she amazing? Come back to our next podcast.
Yeah.
What were you going to say? Go ahead.
I was just going to say, aren't we all amazing?
Yes, we are.
Go out and do amazing things.
Yeah, good. See you later.